They say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Well, mine started as the most humiliating. My own parents refused to walk me down the aisle in front of 200 guests. But what happened next? Let's just say they weren't prepared for who I really was. This is the story of how my wedding day became the day I finally stopped hiding who I'd become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My dad owned a small auto repair shop, and my mom worked as a school secretary. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. I was their only child, and for the first 18 years of my life, I was everything they wanted me to be. I was valedictorian at Cedar Rapids High, got a full scholarship to Northwestern University. For journalism, my parents were so proud. Dad would brag to anyone who'd listen about his daughter going to the fancy Chicago school. Mom would send care packages every month with homemade cookies and notes telling me how proud she was. But college changed everything. At Northwestern, I discovered I had a talent for writing that went beyond journalism. I started a blog during my sophomore year called Midnight Confessions. It was supposed to be anonymous, just me writing about college life, relationships, the struggles of being a first-generation college student from a small town. I wrote about feeling out of place among my wealthy classmates, about missing my mom's cooking, about the imposter syndrome that kept me awake at night. I wrote about working 3 part-time jobs just to afford textbooks, about wearing the same 5 outfits on rotation, about calling home collect because I couldn't afford long-distance charges. These stories resonated with thousands of students across the country who felt exactly the same way. Within 6 months, I had 50,000 followers. By senior year, 500,000. The advertising revenue was enough to pay for my entire education and then some, but I never told my parents. They thought I was just studying and working part-time at the campus library. The success felt surreal one day. I was counting pennies for ramen noodles. The next, I was getting 5-figure brand deal offers. Major companies wanted to partner with Midnight Confessions. Literary agents started reaching out. Publishing houses were interested, but I was terrified that if anyone found out who was behind the blog, they'd think I was a fraud. After all, how could someone writing about being broke actually be making money from those very stories? After graduation, I moved to Portland, Oregon. Told my parents I got a job at a local newspaper making $35,000 a year. In reality, I was making 10 times that from my blog, brand partnerships, and the book deal I'd just signed. The book deal alone was a 6-figure advance, more money than my father made in 2 years at the auto shop. Instead of celebrating with my family, I was hiding in my new city, pretending to struggle while secretly living a life of financial freedom I'd never imagined possible. I bought a beautiful apartment in the Pearl District, but whenever my parents visited, I'd stage. It too looked like I was struggling. I'd hide the expensive furniture, put up cheap decorations, even borrow a friend's beat-up car to park outside. I kept a separate poor apartment, a studio I rented across town just for their visits. I'd stock it with generic brand food, secondhand furniture from thrift stores, and bills I'd print out showing fake late payment notices. The elaborate charade was exhausting, but I was convinced it was necessary. I even practiced walking differently, slouching my shoulders like someone weighed down by financial stress. Why did I lie? Because I knew exactly what they'd say. Wasting your education, writing stories on the internet isn't a real job. You need security, benefits, and a proper career. For 3 years, I lived this double life. My parents thought I was barely scraping by as a small-town journalist who'd moved to the big city. They'd send me money for groceries, lecture me about being practical, and suggest I move back home where life makes sense. Meanwhile, I was building an empire. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, living the American dream that my parents had worked so hard to give me, and I was too scared to tell them about it. Every month, when they'd send me care packages with $20 bills tucked inside homemade cookies, I'd feel like the worst daughter in the world. They were sacrificing their own comfort to help their struggling daughter, when in reality, I was probably making more money than they'd ever seen. That's when I met him. He was everything my parents would approve of on paper. a pediatric surgeon. At Oregon Health and Science University, Harvard educated, from a good family in Boston, financially stable, conventionally successful. We met at a charity gala I was covering for my blog. He had no idea who I was online. He wasn't much of a social media person. To him, I was just the sweet journalist from Iowa who was trying to make it in Portland. I was there as a featured speaker, actually, talking about the digital economy and young entrepreneurs. But I told him I was just covering the event for a small local publication. When he asked which publication, I panicked and made up a name on the spot, Portland Weekly Review, which didn't even exist. The lie started from our very first conversation. He was kind, brilliant, and completely genuine. He didn't care that I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, my decoy car, or that I lived in what he thought was a modest apartment. He fell in love with who he thought I was, the struggling writer with big dreams. But here's the thing I fell in love with. Him too. Real love. The kind that makes you want to be honest, to share everything. But I was so deep in the lie by then, I didn't know how to dig myself out. When he proposed after 18 months of dating, I said yes immediately. But as we started planning the wedding, the lies became harder to maintain. He wanted a simple ceremony. His family was wealthy, but understated. My parents, however, had very specific ideas about what my wedding should look like. They wanted to pay for whatever they could afford, insisting on having control over the guest list, the venue, the menu. "We know you can't afford much on your salary," my mom said during one of our planning calls, "but this is our daughter's wedding. We'll make it beautiful." They wanted to invite everyone from Cedar Rapids, their friends, distant relatives, people I barely knew. They wanted the ceremony at the community center, the reception at the VFW hall. They wanted my dad's friends band to play and my mom's sister to make the cake. I tried to gently suggest alternatives, but they wouldn't hear it. "Honey," Dad said, "we know you've gotten fancy ideas living in Portland, but a wedding is about family and community, not showing off." Meanwhile, my career was exploding. My first book, Small Town Dreams, Big City Realty, had just hit the New York Times bestseller list. I was getting invited to speak at conferences. Major brands were offering six-figure sponsorship deals. And Netflix was interested in optioning my story for a series, but I couldn't tell anyone. Not my fiancé, not my parents, not even my closest. Friends back home. I was living in this bizarre parallel universe where I was successful beyond my wildest dreams, but had to pretend. Was struggling to pay rent. The worst part was lying to my fiancé. He'd come home from 12-hour surgeries, exhausted from saving children's lives, and try to comfort me about my financial struggles. He'd offer to pay for things, insist on covering dinner, worry about my student loans that I'd already paid. "Off years ago, after we're married, you don't have to stress about money anymore," he'd say. "I make enough for both of us. You can focus on your writing without worrying about paying bills." It broke my heart. He was trying to rescue me from a situation that didn't exist. I'd watch him come home exhausted, sometimes having lost a patient. That day, and there I'd be complaining about my fake financial problems. He'd hold me and tell me everything would be okay, that we'd figure it out together. Meanwhile, I had enough money in my accounts to pay off his medical school loans twice. Over. The guilt was eating me alive. But I was in so deep that admitting the truth felt impossible. But the wedding planning was where everything started to fall apart. My parents wanted to invite 150 people. His family was planning for 80. The venue my parents chose could barely hold 100. And the catering budget they'd allocated was about a tenth of what was needed for a proper meal. I was sitting on enough money to throw the wedding of the century, but I was trapped by my own lies. I'd lie awake at night doing calculations. I could afford a wedding that would cost more than my parents' house, but I had to pretend that. Even upgrading the paper napkins to cloth was a financial stretch. I knew I could fix everything. I could pay for the wedding myself, upgrade the venue, hire proper caterers, make it beautiful for everyone. But doing that would expose everything. 3 months before the wedding, I made a decision that I thought was clever. I told my parents that his family had offered to contribute significantly to the wedding fund. I said they insisted on upgrading the venue and catering as their gift to us. That's very generous of them, Mom said, but I could hear the tension in her voice. I hope they don't think we can't provide for our own daughter. It's not like that, I assured her. They just want to help make the day special. But I could feel the shift. My parents started making comments about fancy people and showing off. They began to resent his family, thinking they were being condescending. The final straw came 6 weeks before the wedding. I had secretly booked the grand ballroom at the Sentinel Hotel in downtown Portland. It was elegant, spacious, and could accommodate everyone comfortably. When I told my parents about the venue change, they were furious. "We are not charity cases," Dad said, using my full name like he did when I was in trouble as a child. "We don't need his family throwing money around to make our daughter's wedding acceptable to them. That's not what this is about." I tried to explain, isn't it? Mom interrupted. "First they change the venue. Then they upgrade the catering. What's next? Are they going to tell us our clothes aren't good enough? That our friends aren't sophisticated enough?" I realized I had created exactly the situation I was trying to avoid. My parents felt humiliated and excluded from their own daughter's wedding, but I was in too deep to tell the truth now. The web of lies had become so complex that I couldn't see a way out without destroying everything. Each lie required 10 more lies to support it. And I was drowning in the deception I'd created. 2 weeks before the wedding, everything exploded. My parents came to Portland for the final fitting and rehearsal dinner. They were staying at my fake apartment, the one I'd rented just to maintain the illusion, and were already tense about the whole situation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rehearsal dinner was at a nice restaurant that his family had chosen. Extravagant, but definitely upscale. My parents walked in wearing their best clothes, Dad in a suit he'd bought at JCPenney. Mom in a dress she'd gotten on clearance at Macy's. They looked lovely, but I could see they felt out of place. His family was gracious and welcoming, but there was a cultural gap. His parents talked about their recent trip to Europe, their plans to renovate their summer house in Cape Cod, and their son's achievements in medical school. My parents talked about the auto shop, the Iowa weather, and how proud they were that I'd made it in the big city. It should have been fine. Different backgrounds, same love for their children. But I could see my parents shrinking into themselves, feeling inadequate and out of place. After dinner, as we were walking to the cars, I overheard his mother talking to his aunt. "She seems lovely," she said, referring to me. "Very down-earth. He says she's been struggling as a writer, but she has such a good heart." My parents heard it too. Dad's face went red, and Mom's eyes filled with tears. They didn't say anything at the moment, but I knew. The next morning, they called me to their hotel room. "We need to talk about something," Mom said, her voice shaking. They'd been up all night talking. They'd heard his family discussing me, referring to me as someone who needed financial help, someone they were supporting through the wedding. "We raised you better than this," Dad said. "We didn't raise you to be a charity case or to marry into money because you can't make it on your own." "Let me finish," he continued. "We've been thinking about this all night. We don't think you're marrying him for the right reasons. We think you're marrying him because you're struggling and he represents security." "That's not true," I said, but they weren't listening. "We love you," Mom said, "but we can't support this marriage. Can't stand up there and give you away to someone when we don't think you're being honest with him or with yourself." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. "We're saying we won't be walking you down the aisle," Dad said. "Can't be part of something that feels like it's built on the wrong foundation." I begged them to reconsider. I tried to explain without revealing the truth, but everything I said just made it worse. They thought I was making excuses, that I was too proud to admit I was marrying for security rather than love. "We'll always love you," Mom said as they packed their bags. "We can't pretend to support this. When you're ready to be honest with yourself about why you're really getting married, we'll be here." They left for the airport that afternoon. My wedding was in 2 days and my parents weren't coming. The morning of my wedding, I sat in the bridal suite at the Sentinel Hotel staring at myself in the mirror. My makeup artist had left. My hair was perfect. My dress was beautiful, but I felt completely hollow. My fiancé knocked on the door. "Can I come in? I know it's bad luck, but I'm worried about you." I let him in, and he immediately saw that I'd been crying. "Your parents?" he asked gently. I nodded. I'd told him they had a family emergency and couldn't make it. Another lie in an endless chain of lies. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he said, holding me carefully to avoid messing up my dress. "I know how much you wanted them here." "What if they're right?" I said. "What if I'm not good enough for you?" He pulled back and looked at me seriously. "You are the most genuine, hardworking, talented woman I know. You inspire me every day with your determination and your heart. I don't care if you're struggling financially. I don't care if you never become a famous writer. I love you for who you are, not what you have." It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me, and it was all based on a lie. Here was this incredible man, this healer who dedicated his life to saving children, telling me he loved me for qualities I'd been hiding behind a facade of fake struggle. He loved my determination to make it as a writer, not knowing I'd already made it years ago. He admired my resilience in the face of financial hardship that didn't exist. Every word of love felt like another dagger of guilt in my chest. An hour later, I was supposed to walk down the aisle. 200 guests were seated in the ballroom. My fiancé was at the altar looking handsome and nervous. His family was in the front row, beaming with pride, and I was standing at the back of the room. Alone, the wedding coordinator approached me. "Miss, we're ready to begin. Who's walking you down the aisle?" "No one," I said quietly. "I'm walking alone." She looked confused, but nodded. The music started, the traditional bridal march. I took a deep breath and started walking. But with each step, I felt worse. Everyone was looking at me with pity, whispering about where my parents were. I could see the confusion and concern on my fiancé's face. His family looked mortified that my parents hadn't shown up. I made it halfway down the aisle before I stopped. I couldn't do it. I couldn't start my marriage with this enormous lie between us. I couldn't let him think he was marrying someone who didn't exist. And I couldn't let my parents think their daughter was so ashamed of her background that she'd rather pretend to be poor than admit where she came from. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "I need to say something." Before we continue, my fiancée looked alarmed. "What's wrong?" "I need to tell you all the truth," I said, my hands shaking, "about who I really am. I've been living a lie for the past 4 years," I began. The room was completely silent. My fiancé looked confused and worried. His family exchanged glances. "I told you all that I work as a small-town journalist making $35,000 a year." "Not true. I'm actually a best-selling author and content creator. I make more in a month than I told you I make in a year." Gasps echoed through the crowd. I've been hiding my success because I was ashamed. Not of being successful, but of how I thought people would judge me for it. I thought my parents would think I was wasting my education. I thought my fiancé would think I was just another privileged person playing at being a writer. My fiancé looked stunned. "When you met me, you fell in love with someone you thought was struggling and determined. But I wasn't struggling. I was already successful. I've been lying to you about who I am for our entire relationship." I pulled out my phone and projected my real Instagram account onto the screen behind me. 2 million followers. It's photos of me at book signings, speaking engagements, living in my real apartment. "This is who I really am," I said. "Author of Small Town Dreams, Big City Realty," which has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 6 months. I have a Netflix deal, a second book coming out next year, and I could have paid for this entire wedding myself. The crowd murmured, my fiancé looking shocked. My parents refused to walk me down the aisle because they thought I was marrying him for his money. They thought I was ashamed of my background and trying to marry up for security. But the truth is, I was so insecure about my success that I pretended to be poor. I am breaking down now. I lied to everyone I love because I was afraid. I was afraid my parents would think I'd become someone they didn't recognize. I was afraid my fiancé would think I was fake or pretentious. I was afraid of being judged for having the life I'd dreamed of since I was a little girl. I turned to face my fiancé directly. "I understand if you can't forgive me. I understand if you don't want to marry someone who's been lying to you for 2 years. But I need you to know that everything else was real. My love for you, my admiration for your work, my desire to build a life with you, that was all real." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and took my hands. I'm hurt that you didn't trust me with the truth, he said. I'm confused about why you felt you needed to hide who you are. But I fell in love with your heart, your humor, your passion for writing, and your loyalty to your family. Those things are real, whether you make $35,000 or $350,000. The crowd started to smile. The woman I fell in love with is standing right here, he continued. She's just more successful than I knew, which honestly makes me even more proud too. Be marrying her. I was crying with relief. But he added, we're going to have some serious conversations about trust and honesty in our marriage. I know, I said. I promise, no more lies. Ever. I turned back to the guests. I owe everyone. Here an apology, I said. But most of all, I owe my parents an apology. They raised me to be honest and proud of who I am, and I failed them. They're not here today because they thought I was ashamed of where I come from. But I'm not ashamed. I'm grateful. Everything I've achieved started with the values they taught me. I pulled out my phone. Mom, Dad, I know you're watching this live stream because Mrs. Henderson from next door set it up for you. I know you're hurt and disappointed, but I need you to know something. I didn't lie because I was ashamed of you. I lied because I was afraid of disappointing you. Speaking directly to the camera, I continued. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough. To tell you the truth, I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't good enough for my new life. You are my foundation, my inspiration, and my heroes. Will you please come back and walk me down the aisle? Because I can't get married without my parents here. 20 minutes later, there was a commotion at the back of the ballroom. My parents had been watching the live stream from the airport, and they'd gotten in their car and driven straight back to the hotel. They walked in still wearing their traveling clothes. My mother crying, my father trying to hold it together. They made their way to the front of the room where I was waiting. We are so proud of you, Mom said. We're proud of your success, and we're proud that you found the courage to tell the truth. But we're disappointed that you thought you had to hide from us, Dad added. We love you no matter what you do for a living. We just want you to be happy and honest. I know, I said. I was scared and stupid, and I'll never hide from you again. So Dad said, straightening his tie, are we doing this wedding or what? The guests erupted in cheers and applause. Music started again, and this time, I walked down the aisle with both my parents beside me. When we reached the altar, both my parents hugged my fiancé and welcomed him to the family. The ceremony was beautiful, emotional, and most importantly, honest. At the reception, my parents mingled easily with his family, talking about their daughter's real achievements with genuine pride. My dad even bragged to his father about my book. Deal. During our first dance, my husband whispered in my ear, I have one question about all this. What? I asked nervously. Does this mean you can afford to pay for the honeymoon? I laughed so hard I almost cried. Yes, I can afford the honeymoon. That was 3 years ago. We're happily married, and I've never lied to him since. My parents are my biggest supporters and proudest fans. They come to all my book signings and tell anyone who will listen about their daughter, the best-selling author, the lesson I learned. The people who truly love you will love you for who you are, not who you pretend to be. Success doesn't change. Your worth, it just reveals it. Sometimes the biggest risk you can take is telling the truth. Oh, and one more thing, we had the most expensive wedding in Cedar Rapids history. My parents couldn't have been more proud to pay for. None of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.